Boy, was that the last presentation Kevin did? Did that not hit home, huh? Yeah, give him another round of applause. I also hope that you take into account what I mentioned this morning in the challenge that I gave, because that right there was a perfect example of something good, but how could we make that better? How could the next job that Kevin has, he may not have that same team, he may not have that same contractor, he may not have that same group, and he's going to have to repeat that over. We're going to have to do it again and again with different people, different contractors. So how can we use technology to make our lives easier? How can we use technology to reduce that indirect cost? How can we, that's the kind of challenge I'm trying to say. We can do this as an industry, and you all in the industry should be working together to do that. And that's our expectation as owners. All right, I'll get off the last one and go to this one. How can we drive AWP to drive digital delivery? All right, there we all are, Ted, Walid, Jeff. We're going to go through some questions today. How can we use this? What data do we need to collect in order to support digital technology? You saw, again, the presentations both this morning from Kevin was all about data, right? We've been knowing that data is the common thread. Stakeholders get information. They're either getting too much information, they're not getting enough information, and oftentimes we just don't have the right data or the attribute to even dissect the information. So data, it's also put in manually. Kevin covered that in his presentation. Often, a lot of PDFs, a lot of scanned documents, whatever you want to call them, they have no real value. There's no attribute to them. And we also, in the current world, are reporting on quite old information. So our P6 schedules, standard way of working was that EPC would give a report on a monthly basis, the status of the project, in which case the P6 information for that monthly report is likely 2 weeks from the last month, so you're 6 weeks behind already. And now we're looking at a 6-week-old P6 schedule, 1,000 pages long. How are we supposed to find what's wrong with that? Now, if we looked at what Kevin's presented this morning with augmented reality, with using 4D, with sitting in a room together saying, what's going on tomorrow, what's going on 6 weeks from now, a month from now, 30 days from now, 90 days from now, whatever. You can see it. We're in real time. So that's two completely different ways to run a project. All right. So what you'll see here is kind of something I drew up, and some people have seen this before. I did this, I think, for the technology conference last February, but that balloon chart I had up this morning on integrated project engineering is kind of that over here on the left. These are standard things that we get on every project, right? We have the engineering requirements. That data is being generated all the time. We have to work with it. Now, where we have some flexibility is in this second phase in construction management. Now, AWP is an enormous process that allows us to use technology and brings it together, but it doesn't do it for everything, right? It's not going to do some things like the real-time progress that we might want to use in capturing what the rules of credit are. Instead of having people go out and test it, we do it with robot cameras or people wearing backpack cameras or still cameras and imaging, depending on how much you have in place. Those kinds of things are currently not linked, but they could be linked. It just depends on how you're going to do your digital transformation. But all of these elements need to use data is the point. And then obviously, we don't build projects as a business. That has no business value at all. If we were doing that, we wouldn't be building projects. We build them because we're going to operate them, we're going to own them, we're going to create value of some sort. And in order to do that, you need that quality data to turn over to the asset. So there's a digital twin that comes out of this in the end, and everything we do in execution should support that digital twin. So, Ted, how in the world do we get right information to the right people at the right time?
Thank you, Chad. Can I just say very carefully?
Probably not. Speech done. All right. How do we get the right information to the right people at the right time? We're very fortunate, and I'm not going to read from the slide, but it'll be up there for your consumption. But we're very fortunate that this AWP community has come together and actually determined what data is required to execute against AWP, which if you heard me speak just briefly earlier, you'll know that to me that is pretty synonymous with digital project delivery. And those take the form of the CII AWP data requirements. When you get the slide deck, there's actually a link to them here in the slide. But you can also just do a Google search, CII AWP data requirements, and they will pop up. So we've done a great job, and they're continually being modified and revised as they're actually applied within projects, because that is actually happening. How many of you are familiar with and/or have used the AWP data requirements in the context of a project execution? All right. This time next year, the year after, I hope to see a whole lot more hands up.
I can't believe that. Hold your hands higher.
Yeah. Let's see him. Yeah. I want to see him. Now. Yeah, that's better. Now at least I know that some folks in the audience know what I'm talking about and have seen the form that they've taken. But I want to emphasize, too, that, the production of those data requirements really were spawned by Jay Mosier in 2019. And what I really want to comment on, the actual formation of the AWP data requirements actually mirrors what should be put in practice within our projects, in the sense that we had a group of owners, providers, suppliers, EPCs that all came together and worked diligently for, let's say, 6 months to work out the initial draft, determining what those requirements should be, and going through each one of those and determining if they can be delivered by each one of the responsible parties, right? So truly vetted set of data requirements. And they really, truly, it makes my job easy up here, because they truly do represent what you need to execute AWP digitally. The other thing that they contain within them is you've got a couple of guidelines in there and some other things, but they sit within a framework that gives you a start within your own company to actually apply them in your digital project execution. So within the content that's published with the AWP data requirements, you have a guideline and you have diagrams that show you how each one of those data requirements fits into a project execution delivery. But in order to be successful in the application of those AWP data requirements, you have to begin early. And that's another thing that's emphasized here on this slide. You've got to begin as early as pre-feed in your preparation and planning to execute against those data requirements and to really build up your digital project execution delivery plan. And certainly by feed. And by feed, you got to consider incorporating those AWP data requirements into your contractual obligations, right? To ensure that you've communicated properly with your partners on how to deliver against those requirements. And through that contractual obligation and negotiation, usually, you will determine what is needed when and who the responsible party is. And without those mechanisms, it's not impossible to execute, but you've got to start early. I could go on and on about this topic, but the ultimate goal here is to make our projects forward-looking, to really turn that data into information and actionable knowledge that adds value to the projects. It's not an esoteric exercise. But we really want to get this panel discussion into the actual Q&A portion. So I'm going to leave it at that and hand it over to, I believe, Waleed.
Thank you, Ted. I believe that this works. Okay, let me see. All right, so here actually, I believe, when I saw only a few hands has been risen who have been exposed to the requirement of AWP data requirement from CII. So for those who've seen it, and for those who didn't see exactly, it is a huge amount of data, and it depends exactly on the size of project. It will be even much more. So for argument's sake, what are the important considerations that we have to take into plan for a giga project? What does a giga project or a mega project add to the table? Is volume, lots of data, so many documents, so many specs, and at the same time, okay, all the stakeholders, the vendors, and so on. So my colleague here, Ted, actually mentioned about the timely fashion or the real time of access of data and so on. And even during Kevin's presentation has mentioned about the lesson learned and how we can minimize basically the time consumed in order for us to prepare all of these data. So let me try to move forward. How to move forward? The green button? Okay. Oh, oops, backwards. Obviously this is sensitive. All right, so the first is the most important part is the alignment of stakeholders. So the alignment of stakeholders, they must believe in something we call a digital book. What is a digital book? Any project during FEED dictates so much EP deliverables and C deliverables. Now these deliverables are managed in so many contracts by document management procedures, communication protocols, and information management procedure. But this manages only the flow of the document. It does not manage the content. The content of these documents will partake in our advanced work packaging. So for example, definition of a construction work area, the field disciplines that are engaged in it, the construction work package. And even if the owner will participate in the installation work package, also this information will take part of the installation work package. The granularity of the component that will contain or consist of these packages. For argument's sake, we saw that in Kevin's presentation, 5.5 million components, all right? A giga project can go between 30 to 40 and 60 million component, which I will be presenting in our breakout session in CCC case study. And I will go further in detail how the preparation and going uphill to manage the collection of these data in a timely fashion. So the essence of a digital book is converting all these EP deliverables, at least the pinnacle of these documents, into digital content and agree on the content itself and how we manage so that you have a complete visibility, a real-time visibility when these documents change or they are basically forwarded to any stakeholders. Because these documents are dynamic, you cannot prevent change. Change is part of our, like Mother Nature. But the most important part of the A in advanced work packaging, is how can we deal with change with minimizing disruption and enhancing still efficiency. So this comes to point B, alignment, alignment, alignment. We might align on the goal of implementing advanced work packaging, but the processes that they are in detail might not be aligned. And so many times we push that a little bit further during the contract cycle. This should be done early as a beginning. And at the beginning, it has to be driven by the owner of the project, because at that time, they will maintain full visibility from upstream to downstream. Having said that, in a giga project, the volume of data is humongous. And definitely, sometimes we tend to think exactly, we try to digitalize everything. But by doing so, we create a monster. A recipient can receive so much information, they don't know what to deal with it. And this is where, that the right platforms and the right tools has to present itself to handle all of that in a timely fashion and make it seamlessly for all recipients in order to have all the information displayed based on their responsibility and giving them the capability to have a proactive decision making. The other aspect, in order to consider mainly, because it was a question raised by some of the audience here, also to Kevin, about resourcing. Implementing advanced work packaging, also in mega projects, you have to have the right resource. But is it resource intensive? No. It's because when we implement advanced work packaging, we change the mindset of execution. The rules change, the game changes, and for that, you need people who are ready to adapt to that. They have to be experienced in piping, steel structure, civil, but at the same time, they know how to read data, and they are advocate of data. And that is something that we are trying as much as possible day and day in to make these resources, build them from ground up. So as of now, we have scarcity. The projects are escalating, and these resources are hard to find. But we need, in order to ensure training by itself is not enough because they need time. But these resources will be the pillars as we go forward for successful AWP implementation. Fourth, as we, like even some of the colleagues stated, like the number of systems on any project can vary between 40 to 60. Look at this interoperability that needs to pertain so that these information are transformed in a easily fashion. The digital plan, the architecture. So this also is a huge consideration, and I will shed the light in the breakout session of our experience and how did we suffer initially in order to make this happen with all the stakeholders, and subsequently we managed somehow to see the light end of the tunnel. So having said that, I'll pass for you, Jeff.
Green button, right? So I'm going to touch on a couple points that the rest of the guys on the panel have talked about, and that's really how do we keep this information updated? How do we support providing this real-time information? And what really brings that together? And what really brings that together is I want everybody to look around the room at the edge of the room, because we're all surrounded by technology platforms. And that's really what starts bringing this together, and being able to leverage the requirements from the owner, to leverage the data from the EPC firms, to leverage all of the stuff that Jay talked about we were collecting with sensor data and scans, and basically pulling that data together. So data is our tool, but the technology becomes our conduit in order to enable those teams. That's all technology is. It's that conduit that allows our processes and the working closely together with the owners, with the EPC firms, with the subcontractors, with the fabricators, to bring all of that information together. And that data needs to be available to everybody and working together. So from a technology standpoint, what we end up doing is being that conduit. Now, everybody laughs a little bit when I use this next example. But we actually figured this out years ago. Technology is a lazy Susan. That's all it is. And to bring that data together to the right people at the right time, we're doing nothing more than spinning a lazy Susan so that Thomas Jefferson's daughter's potatoes didn't get cold, because that's who actually invented the lazy Susan. So bringing all of the technology together, all of the technology vendors that are around you working together, having the open APIs, having the ability to spin this data where you need it, when you need it, and look at it from an owner's point of view, or look at it from an EPC's point of view, or look at it from a fabricator's point of view, or look at it from a citizen's point of view as we go through and we're building these plants in their neighborhoods. The technology is what enables us to do that. Jay?
Okay, so in this session, we didn't want to stand up here and talk to you. We wanted to talk with you. So you've got, what do we got, Lloyd? 35 minutes to do Q&A. Because this is what it's about, right? Let's have a discussion. Let's see where you all sit within this discussion. Do you have some comments? Do you have some experience? All right, so some questions over here. I don't know who's got the mics. They're coming to you. What about over here? He's got mics in the back.
Hi, my name's Jeff Ackerman. Good to
Jeff
see you again.
Ackerman, blast from the past, retired shell.
So, in the context of CII and the data guide, which huge proponent for, can you guys talk a little bit about data quality to time? So you have this completeness of data, but you have a subset of the engineering information that might be required to feed construction. And so, you know, in any specification, it tells you the what, but it doesn't always tell you the when.
Well, I'll take a stab at the first one. And maybe, I don't know if we got any extra mics we could get up here to share, because we're not going to be jumping up and down and falling off the stage. But yeah, Jeff, My thoughts around that is we spend an enormous amount of manpower sitting behind a screen in the middle of execute, trying to sift through data that doesn't have the right attributes or is incorrect. And when we take the time to do that, it's not only costing us money, but you can't integrate that data into whatever you're trying to do, whether it's a AWP platform or whether it's a 4D model or a 3D model. If the data is corrupt or it's incorrect or it's insufficient or it's unattributed, it's really not data. Okay? Yeah, Tim?
Yeah, no, actually, we might just take this one off the. Yeah. Can we do that here? And you guys keep that on this side. I'll keep this here. There we go. Sorry about that noise. Yeah, so I mean that whole topic I'm just gonna reference as data quality management, right? Data quality management. And what I'll say is that, in my experience in actual management of data in the context of capital project execution, is that usually what's missing is what I'm going to reference as a digital thread framework to ensure that you can actually perform data quality management against everything you're collecting in that project. And that is I'm going to call it rigorous. I'm not going to call it hard, but it is a rigorous activity to work out your digital threads related to all the systems you're using within the context of your project execution, and then ensuring that, number one, you have the right requirements identified in that digital thread. The digital thread will also reference what systems are responsible for each exchange of data. And that digital thread documentation should also say who's responsible for that exchange of data. And then that should also give you the frequency of that exchange of data. And I will say that, the CI AWP data requirements were made possible not only through the consortium that gathered to create them, but also through a donation from ConstructX of their digital thread framework. And what that team did is they actually stripped the digital requirement or the data requirement out of that digital thread framework to produce the AWP data requirements, right? But what CII has the next step to do is actually document that digital thread framework generically for industry. And look, I have not made a call, but I will make a call now along with Jay to make sure that work gets done, because we just need to resource that and get that documented and published for industry. Because it truly, the digital thread framework answers the questions you just asked, right? What, when, who, how, right? And then once you've answered those questions, you should be able to perform true DQM or data quality management.
Well, Ted, to add on to that on the house side, one of the things I don't see documented is we spend a lot of time documenting the processes and what we need to transfer, but we don't document how we're going to transfer it. And what piece of technology is responsible for it, and how are you going to make those connections, and what do we actually need to do to make those connections? Is it even possible to do it the way we're thinking, or do we need to reapproach how we're going to take those threads of data and pass them amongst each other?
And I'm just going to add one more thing to that and say that, that goes back to the contractual obligation for the exchange, especially if it's related to an external partner. That's just got to be taken into consideration. And the other thing is you got to take a step beyond just the contractual obligation. You have to understand that there might be miscommunications within that contract itself and misunderstandings, and you've got to test. I mean, you've got to put in a plan to test those exchanges within the context of your project delivery. If you expect it just to work because you put it in the contract and you've documented it, you're probably going to miss the mark. You've got to plan, you've got to test, you've got to engage with that partner and ensure that there's understanding about the exchange and the timing for those exchanges.
Well, somebody else over here? There's one back here. That's Fernando. Yes, thank you, Fernando, for the IP on the data. That's for sure. That was a big contributor.
It's meant for the industry. So a question I have, and I'm always thinking what you guys are thinking, that, where are we going next? Information is valuable only to the consumer of that information. And, we can look at the data and we can see just lots of it, but we got to make it make sense, right? We can have 1,000 dashboards, but how are we looking to make the data more consumable, you know, at the end user? What does they need, whether you're in engineering or whether you're in procurement? You know, how are we going to approach that in the future?
Well, actually, if my first point was like related to alignment. When I said alignment about stakeholders, it doesn't mean only like during the feed and the EPC, but you have to include your constructors. Construction team are very important during the first alignment phase of a project. So per se, as you stated, how to ensure exactly the information aligns with the engineering and the procurement team and the construction team on site is that the data sets, granularity level, content, and cycle is very important. So here, actually, even when we are talking about the previous question as when, there is a schedule that by the end of the day defines every single milestone in that project. So this has to be firstly aligned. Second, per disciplines, it depends exactly on the data sources where they're coming from. The owner is just a driver. The information sources come from various entities based on who's doing the engineering, who's doing the vendors, who's handling the long lead items until the materials are on site and the drawing and so forth and so on. So all of that are deliverables. And as that stated, it's a digital framework related to digital threads. We are calling it the digital book because it's a compilation of all these digital threads and their contents. So this has to be part of the digital plan that you lay out, part of the alignment that has. It's the same thing actually that we used to do on the conventional arena related to constructability study. When you do a constructability study for a project, even at the early stage of the project, you partake with the construction team how we're going to go about it. And that drives even the baseline schedule that the whole project will rely on.
Thank you, Walid. I guess just to add to that, before we move on to the next one, it frustrates me, even internally, when someone you talk to about the process of AWP, for instance, and the answer that you get is, well, that's up to the EPC. All right, if you wait till the EPC, and there's a timeline on this slide that you're seeing up here, and we're going to be presenting, some of us, on RT 390 here at the next breakout sessions, which we did for at CII earlier this year. But one thing that come out of that effort was that this A in advanced or an AWP, right, the front end, is really up to us as owners or to develop something that once the EP or the EPC is involved, they have what they need to perform, right? These data requirements, for instance, need to be done and established at the very, very beginning. Once you've selected your concept and you know what you're going to do, you put together I call it coding structure, you call it what you want. You need to have that data defined and how it's going to do for the rest of that project, from the process it sits in all the way at the beginning, okay? If you don't have that process and you get to commissioning, how are you going to identify the data associated with process? So we miss that step often, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that top chart that Ted has on this slide, which, you know, data is not information. It's data. You have to consume that data, manipulate that data in order to make it information. Then you have to disseminate that information to the right people at the right time with the right authority who can make decisions. And then you have to learn, was that a good decision or not? And when you do that over and over, you get knowledge. And then once you have that knowledge, you repeat it over and over, then you become wisdom, right? So this is not going to happen overnight, but it has to all start early, done right, and be sequentially done until commissioning is complete. All right, next, anybody else? I see a lot of hands. I don't know who's got the mics. I can't see.
So Jay, I will admit this is a question in the form of a statement, so I'll apologize in advance for that. But listening to the ExxonMobil presentation, when you talk about new people who are using information, listening to Fernando talk about the consumers, the question I have is, do we, as these new technologies and processes come online, do you feel, the panel feel, we have a handle on who are the people sitting around the Lazy Susan and how much that has changed just in the last 5 years? A field supervisor using an iPad in the field, do we truly have data requirements architected to deliver to him what he needs? And do we need to be looking at these new consumers?
I mean, that's a continual process check, and realize I think that's more of a question than a statement than you might have thought, right? But from my perspective, I think we have the requirement. In the CIA AWP data requirements, there isn't much missing from that, from my experience and my interaction with functions delivering projects, right? I think we have the right attribution identified, but again, the coordination, right? In the presentation of that requirement, that data that becomes manifest through the execution of the project, what we don't have is this comprehensive documentation within the industry that shows you how to put it all together. And to carry on to Jay's earlier comments, a digital twin concept kind of just popped in my head, and it does every once in a while as it relates to our application of data within the AWP project execution methodology. And that is within a digital twin, they've acknowledged that you develop a very specific view for a very specific end user, right? Because the digital twin, especially for an operating facility, is just so large, and there's so much data, especially if you include real-time operational data, that what you really have to do is, once you've aggregated it, you really got to focus on the end user and that end user experience and how they're going to consume that data. And what I'll say is that we're not quite at that level of maturity with our data requirements and its presentation within the AWP community. And I think that's one of the calls. That's really, I think, the essence of the call that Jay made this morning, right? Is put that documentation in place for industry, because look, it's great we have identified the requirement, but now we really need to coach and understand on how to execute against that requirement and really produce for the end user what they need to execute their jobs.
Actually, having said that, okay, from documentation perspective, I fully agree with you. But coming from the hands-on experience on site, actually currently we are already dealing with a new user, which is the site supervisor. And to answer your question, yes, actually some of the metadata and the attributes and the user interfaces are changing as we speak in order to mitigate the gap between the concept of advanced work packaging until it goes down to the supervisor level. For instance, okay, you might create a coding structure. You give the package a name, a number, all right? So, but this doesn't mean anything to a supervisor until he relates this to the drawing it belongs to the location on site where it is, and then, so the visual implementation, it's not only to state exactly where the heck, for example, the project is, but at least also to provide the supervisor how he can manage his work front and sequencing his packages at hand. So the adoptions, okay, we're working with iPads, and even more, because the 3D model, to put it on site on an iPad is kind of really a little bit hard to maneuver. So currently we're engaging even with complete workstations, we have workstations on the pipe rack, in order to show the 3D model especially, for example, for the lack of GAs. So we put the model there, the alignment around the equipment, piping around the equipment can happen. They're looking at the packages, looking at the material status. So yes, in the last 5 years, and all of this in the last 5 years happened.
Yeah, and Fernando, or Chuck, that's a really good question. And it made me think about what Amy said this morning as well. This is evolving so fast with technology that the resources that we have working on the project, no matter if that's a tradesman or what their level is, their ability to have data and use data is going to rely on how we deliver it to them, right? And we're going to have to get the same work done with people who are less competent than they are today or were before pre-COVID, because a lot of people are gone, and a lot of people aren't going to come back. So how are we going to use this technology that we have to give it to people who may not have the competency that the previous supervisor, superintendent, foreman, whatever had, and allow them to do their job unconstrained not looking at everything under the sun, as well I just said, they're only worried about that work package that's their responsibility, right? That's hopefully what you're doing. But of course, that work package, if you're doing piping, you still have civil, you still have electrical, you have interfaces in that same IWP work area that we really don't have a good process in place to look at right now. This is where I think lean comes in. Why can't we take the lean approach on all of these different disciplines that have to be done in this little bitty area and the timing that we're going to do that and lean that out? There's savings can be done there, okay? All right, who's next?
Hey, speaking of lean,
Jim.
John Strickland here
John.
with Collaborative Flow, and I do have a background in lean construction. But the data you're talking about has to be shared across a lot of people. And so part of that is understanding when you produce it, what does the user need and how do you find that out? And I haven't heard you talk, maybe I missed it, but I haven't heard you talk much about transparency. So for the data to be real, you have to be transparent about what's really going on. So could you cover either of those two topics?
Actually, like, this is a very sensitive word, transparency. And especially whenever we go to the digital world. So yes, you are absolutely right. The part of the alignment, okay, it's called like whoever, even they are advocate of advanced work packaging, they are a little bit reluctant. For example, in terms of change, we might have the first issuance have complemented with data content, and whenever the change happens, it's suppressed until it gets materialized, and at a later stage, it might show up. And this is definitely not advanced work packaging. So we took us a long time in order to develop with our partners the concept of transparency and meticulously to go beyond contract's obligation and not to be completely fearful for any claim-driven concept and so forth and so on, because change is susceptible at any given of time. Don't think about idle time, material delays, and so forth and so on, but rather look at material delays in terms minimizing disruption. If I cannot work in this area, I can work in that area, so my manpower is optimized. So this concept of transparency we managed to achieve in the last 3 years, provided showing the gains from doing so. So I believe that going further to enhance transparency and the visibility across the fence between all stakeholders is that even to key in a contractual manner so that it'll become documented and to become an industry standard.
Amen. I agree with that. But I'll add to it. When we started our journey, with this technology, and Wallace right, maybe 5 years ago. I mean, it was obviously before that, but I didn't get involved before with that technology element. But when we established what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it, we wanted this hands-off approach, but an eyes-on approach. That was one of our key enablers to do successful AWP. And that meant we don't want to control how the contractors, how the EP, how the C does their work. We don't want to tell them what tools to use, what tools not to use, et cetera, et cetera. We want to give them the requirements that we expect and then deliver. And in order to do that, you have to have this visibility and transparency that you're talking about, right? And I think that we still are on a journey with that. We've had contracting summits with this very group in 2019, I think it was, where we're really discussing how are we going to do this. This is the lump sum EPCs are out there, and we do them, and we're still going to do them in regions that require it. It's really a local content issue more than it is what we would prefer to do. But we have to get to a partnering agreement because you are exactly right, John. When you apply this process, you open the hood of the truck and you can see everything inside that truck. So if the EP or the C is doing work, how do we work with them to make sure, one, they're making money because they have to make money? We want to make money, but if we can finish the job faster and do it better, and less man hours and better safety and better quality, then I think we all win. So we need to work to have some kind of a contractual arrangement that supports that, okay, for all parties. So that will open up the transparency.
I was gonna say, I think it's redefining transparency.
Yeah.
It's not looking at transparency the way we looked at it 10 years ago, but looking at it in a way that can benefit everybody, whether that be a technology provider, whether that be an owner, whether that be the EPC firm. It's redefining what transparency is to us and coming together as a community to define it.
Yeah, and just one last little note on transparency, because the first thing I think of when I think about this issue is confidence, and then the second one is data quality management. And without those two components, confidence and data quality management, we will continue to struggle with transparency.
Yeah, and I know there's probably more, but you know, in order for us to convince our shareholders and stakeholders that this is the process is what we need to be applying, also, we have to have some idea and some evidence of success. If I say, and I remember Kevin's chart earlier on hands-on tool time. For me, it's pretty simple. If you can improve your hands-on tool time from 30%, 37, which is industry standard, to above 55 on a construction in the field, what more evidence do you need? Okay, but I think the more we bring these kinds of pieces of information in, the more we build our case for, hey, this is why we do it and why we want to do it. Who's next? We got time still.
Yeah, this is Yogesh from Technobuild. And in follow-up to the gentleman who asked question on lean, we are all after data like it's the new gold. But from a lean concept, how about treating it 180 degree differently? Data is the new waste. And working on data center construction projects, it takes almost 50 to 60 megawatts for data centers to operate, which is enough to power a small town or a city. So the data is costly, and unless we have a context, and in terms of transparency, if you have circularity of data, where data is as good as you trust it, and if a man, material, or machinery is producing or originating the data or a process, how about the emphasis on ability to know where the source of data is coming from so that when you take a decision, then you can get back to the source of that data, whether it's the work package or the person who's handling it or a process generating the data. What are your thoughts?
I think some of that comes from feedback. We focus a lot on getting the data, and we focus a lot on getting the data out to people who can use it, but we never really talk about getting the feedback back. And I think that feedback back from those individual users helps us refine what data we need to collect so that we actually, in essence, measure what matters. And I don't think that loop's there, right? We're still evolving in my mind to get that feedback loop.
Basically, is your question related to the feedback between stakeholders around the data to identify the source of the information for the sake of authenticity, or just a cyclic source of data? And basically, like in advanced word packaging implementation, and based on your digital plan and the digital thread framework that will entail all the data exchange between all stakeholders to the various cycle of the project, it will define strictly the source, destination, and even the changes that occur in the middle. So this is part of the genes of advanced word packaging. Other way around, you know, we will receive data and your proactive decision making is not aligned whatsoever with the business intent that you are in.
Yeah, I'm Mark Joseph from Garner, and you kind of touched on what I was interested in. But in some ways, I think this whole model of producer of data, requirement, consumer is not really correct. Because certainly in our experience, for data to actually be accurate in practice, you need to have people working with that data, living with the data, and as Jeff said, giving that feedback and keeping it updated and keeping it correct. And I know, Jeff, you sort of said, we're still struggling with that, but I'd really love to hear more about the kinds of things that you're trying to do in terms of bringing people together in the culture in the early stages of contracting to put that feedback in place? Or is this really a completely new area that we're only just touching on?
Actually, okay, the experience in that, it lasts in the last 3 years. Okay, so you have to have your technology partner with you, and at the same time, all the stakeholders aligned to that goal. This takes a lot of times. Okay, as of now, we are doing this actually in the breakout session. I will show more detail on how we did it, where we are, and where we're gonna go next. Okay, but as you stated, initially it requires a lot of effort. Okay, but it's worth it because we started getting the benefit of it, the efficiency, the authenticity, the visibility, and the alignment. Even if there is problem, you have to bear something in mind that all these visibility and clarity and the digital data, it shows you exactly where you are. It doesn't solve your problems, but at least it gives you a proactive alert for you to react correctively. And this is where we are so far. This is the reason why I put this in the consideration of a Giga project. Our Giga project that we are engaged in, we didn't do that consideration at the time of the feed. But definitely our next feed project, this will be part of our checklist, and it will be definitely documented so that all stakeholders align, and then we will have a case proof to show the benefit of doing so.
Yeah, so agreed. And the data modeling that's being done with this data joint working group right now is going to transform, I think, the question you just asked, okay? Yet we are in infancy somewhat with, okay, we got all this data, but, how do we really use it? And so this data modeling that's being done to set up what good looks like in that respect, I think will be a big benefit. The other thing I'll mention is that I'm speaking at AWP here at the end of the month, and the International Oil and Gas Producers. And for those of you who don't know, that organization has gotten engaged with CII a bit now, and this joint data working group has worked through the data with CFOS, which is our operational data standard, and they combine these two things together. And the group I'm working with at IOGP is going to be the digital transformation group, and part of that is how do we apply AWP? And they come to me and they say, well, what do we need to do? You need to sponsor the current requirements and get them into a standard. Okay? All right? We're on the way, and I think that's going to help kick it further down the road. But these things need to become standard. When they become standard and not a requirement, we'll really have change, okay? All right.
Do you have any suggestions for a large specialty trade contractor who has the appetite and ability to execute on AWP methodologies to do this on projects where contractually it's not obligated without shouldering the burden of standing up all this infrastructure on our own?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, let's just take it outside of AWP and think about it. Anytime that we do something new, and I've got some Shell folks here, I think there's about 30 of us, I don't know, y'all need to talk to them, interact with them, because they come from all parts, right? I haven't even met all of them, don't even know them all. So, but we got folks here in other businesses that are new to us, okay? Renewable natural gas, hydrogen. I mean, these aren't, Shell expertise type things, right? But we're in it. Now, we can use our knowledge, right? And we can use our experience and our education and so on and so forth to help do those projects. But it's new, right? You don't have the template. So as a contractor trying to come into an AWP space, it's no different than us coming into a new technology space. We know that when we do those first few, it's going to cost us some more money. It always does. It's life. We get better at it. The more you can repeat it, the more you can standardize on it, the more you can apply your same people to it, the faster you're going to do it, safer, better quality, et cetera, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think there is a commitment at the EPC level or supplier level, whatever you are, to say, I'm going to jump out on the limb and I'm going to put the overhead in order to see the outcome that I know I can achieve. And you've heard some examples of that with Kevin's presentation earlier. The evidence is there. So invest in it. If you truly believe in it, invest in it. I think what we've tended to see is that there are companies that are in this room and EPCs that have jumped on and done that application and spent that time and effort to do it, and now they're making more on the projects that they're working on. And they're doing them better, safer, and faster. And therefore, it's all ultimately going to turn into more return at the end. Okay?
Yeah, just to add on that. You know, I mean, with very little time, right? It's demonstrate the value and just make it hard to say no. You know, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, right? And the only thing I can think that you can do is really market and document that value that you think you're offering in your application of AWP and your business can do, and just make it hard to say no.
I will tell you something, like it depends on your role at the time, because you can do it, depends exactly by you. Let's say, for example, if you have the whole project, like the enabling works, civil, steel structure, piping, E&I, and so on. At least if for your client is not AWP driven, you can choose the driving discipline per se. For oil and gas, it will be piping. So in that, there'll be some effort in your company in order for you to digitize whatever is conventionally provided to you, and then show added value. This is something we've done in the past, okay? Because they might not, because the thing is about advanced work packaging, it's not just reading a procedure and then agree on the implementation and then looking at whatever annex to that procedure as deliverable that makes the owner or the client, okay, compliant to AWP. It's owning it. And to own it, they have to know exactly how to manage it. So this requires visibility and vision and believe in the goal that can be met so that they can push it, all right? And from the construction side to pull it. So this is I believe it's a journey rather than just convincing them just in alignment. And that's why I stressed on the concept of alignment through the whole project cycle.
Hey guys, Michael DeBrell here from PTAG. I'm a computer scientist by background, so, and I love, this is perfect for me. I look around the room, I see all these software companies, and guess what they program with? Data, day in and day out. And I really like the AWP and the lean and the PPM methods. They're all data-driven methods. And Jay, you said that word standard. If we want innovation that isn't each of us uniquely, every project, Kevin's next project, putting it all together again and assembling our project support pieces from sticks each and every time, we need standards to base on. And that means industry needs to agree. But the piece that's missing for me is the foundational data that, and I like the word you used earlier, Jay, when you answered another question, coding structure. A lot of people understand the term coding structures. Lots of industries, we all use banks, they figured it out. Manufacturers figured it out. The IT industry, we all have cell phones and that, they figured it out 25, 30 years ago. We figured this out. If you were in the conferences when I was a young man back then, we were having this conversation. Mm-hmm. So the piece that's missing from me, and I heard that, and Ted, I'm going to investigate the CII research team, but the piece that's missing for me is the foundational data. Each and every time, if we start with our 4 engineering companies on a project and our 60 million pieces of information, and if they all start from a different place, we can use tools. What did Kevin say? He had 40 pieces of software and he used Power BI to bring it all together so mere humans can understand it. If we get it right, we could get that down to 4 or 5 pieces of software to give us a vision. And that's the piece that I see missing. AWP in itself is a huge data structure, but each and every time somebody implements AWP, they're implementing it on a unique data structure. And so where are we going with that to get the foundational coding structure that concrete is concrete is concrete, regardless of whether you're building a power plant, a mine, or a refinery?
All right, that was a long question, but I think I got it. And I know you're the last one, Lloyd. You're right. I see the watch, and I'm going to answer this, and it's going to also maybe help answer the last question. And this was the thought that I walked into the conference in CII in San Diego in 2019, and I'm sitting with some other owners, and I think Lloyd was there at the time, and I said, look, let's go have a conversation. And we haven't a collusion. That's why Lloyd was in the room. And I sat with Exxon and Chevron and Dow. I don't remember who else was there, but it was a bunch of owners, okay? And I said, hey, do you all see this freight train coming our way? If you don't, I mean, I see the technology's moving so fast that you've got all these, companies putting together work packaging and blah, 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 blah. I said, if we don't have something that is standard, okay, to your point, okay, across the board, then they're going to do it differently for Shell. They're going to do it differently for Exxon. They're going to do it differently for Dow, blah, blah, Chevron. And that's not what we want. We need to have this as an industry standard to where the EPCs don't have to build a model for each of us. I mean, that's where we end up paying tons of money. If we Shellize something, you can bet your blue booties it's going to be more money, and it's going to take longer. I need my pumps orange or red or what? No, you don't. But now we got JIP 33. It's an industry standard. It is what it is. No, we don't do it anymore, right? So to your point, that's why we started this. And then the second thing is we also said if you're a company working, at least for those companies in the energy sector and chemicals, if you don't do AWP, you won't be working with us, okay? So maybe that is a reason you should get into it.